This conference will now be recorded.
Apologies for that. In case you were wondering, we're recording our webinar. I'm just checking to see if I can move to the next slide. Excuse me while we just solve this technical for a moment. Beryl, would you like to introduce yourself while we're just ensuring?
Hi, this is Beryl. Can everybody hear me? This is a free-speaking voice check.
We can hear
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, now I'll do something that's harder than that. I'll try not to speak until it's my turn.
Fantastic. Thank you, Beryl. It's good to know you're there. So as I was just explaining, we now have some lovely slides, and this is going to be the pattern for our webinar. Beryl and I are going to attempt to not speak too much to make sure there's a lot of time for dialogue with those of you on the call. So to get us started, I wanted to highlight, Siziwe has already hinted at some of this, but I wanted to highlight that the AN is very committed to working together towards enabling decision making. In fact, we firmly believe that it's only by doing this work together that anything will change and that we can see an increase in the use of evidence for decision making. As a network, we don't run training ourselves. What we do is facilitate others to share the kinds of capacity development work they're doing, whether it's formal training courses or workshops or webinars or other types of initiative. So we have a number of platforms where we're sharing others' resources and others' initiatives, and also where we're aiming to take forwards the debates and the dialogues in this space. So we, for example, have a new database of resources that you can search online. In fact, it's being updated at the moment, so the new version will come soon, but that enables you to both share the kinds of capacity development initiatives that you might be running and also to access those of others. And then we have this secondary piece around facilitating dialogue and discussion and helping to move these debates forward. And I'm going to pass across to Beryl to explain a little around the history of this conversation.
Right, thanks, Ruth. So just very quickly, these dialogues grew out of a question that staff in 3IE started asking in 2016-17 as we realized that our role in building capacity was growing and that we were starting to diversify our approaches to how we met needs, specifically within impact evaluations and systematic reviews, but very much in the area of increasing use of that evidence. So in Kampala at Appellate 2017, we decided to just have a very informal get together of interested people who wanted to share their experiences for good or frustration in the types of training and capacity building, as it's commonly referred to, was taking place. So Deo Francis Hundolo, who's a 3IE colleague based in Benin, is part of developing what's called the West African Impact Evaluation Capacity Building Initiative. And so we learned from that initial small conversation that all was not well in how the users of capacity development were perceiving the capacity that they were receiving. So we then decided, the Ruth Stewart was at this meeting, we all decided that at the Global Evidence Summit in Cape Town, we would broaden that dialogue and advertise it a lot more. And we asked CLEAR, AA, JPAL, and SEGA, and African Evidence Network and ourselves to sit together, and about 30 people continued that conversation about what was working and what wasn't, and answering a question that we put to the group, which was, you know, when somebody says capacity development, what makes you see red? What is it that you really hate? Like for me, it is PowerPoint driven workshops that are supposed to be training people. Just as one example. And then in Pretoria last September, some of you may have remembered that we thought, well, we're just going to keep asking questions and providing an opportunity for people to tell us what they're thinking about what's working and not. And we heard inputs from new voices joining the conversation. We had people from INAS, which specializes in adult learning approaches, DPME, CLEAR, AFREA, and others contributing what they were doing and why, and using these as a platform to be able to start to do more of what Ruth alluded to, which is by communicating better about what we were all doing and sharing what was frustrating us and not, we started to feel an energy that together we could actually start to be more articulate and be able to take forward some of these ideas about working better together. So that's the short history. And over to Ruth now to recap some of the types of frustrations that probably will resonate with a lot of you, and we'll probably hear about those and some new ones later on in the open discussion. Ruth?
Thank you very much, Beryl. I am just moving on to the next slide. We seem to have a problem scrolling our slides a little bit today, so sorry about this. I'm going to find that function. So Beryl, a little bit of a history of why we're here and where we've got up to. And the next slide is really to explain some of those things that make us see red. Those of you who are in Evidence 2018 in Pretoria will remember we had a flash mob dancing, and hence these images on these slides. But I thought this was a nice way of helping us to think of seeing red. So there are a number of issues in this space, and I think those of us who've been doing capacity development of various kinds will be familiar with a lot of these. These are things that 3IE and Beryl have been raising for a number of years now, as have many of our partners across Africa, and these issues have all come up in these dialogues that we've had at these events. So the first one really is around whose agenda is a lot of the capacity development initiatives meeting, and there's a feeling that a lot of these agendas and priorities are being driven by funders rather than actual needs on the ground. And actually sometimes worse than that, I think it's almost a tick box activity. So there might be an international donor who's doing some work within the continent, and they've been asked to do some capacity building whilst they're there. And that will be very much a tick box activity that might only include a small number of people and may be purely to keep those funders happy. And again, linked to that, they're often short-term approaches. So it's rare to find a really integrated program for capacity development that spans a decent period of time, even though we know that you need that kind of length of time and engagement and depth to actually make a difference. There's a tendency, and again, I think it's partly linked to funders and what pushes their buttons and gets them excited. There's a tendency to have training capacity development initiatives provided by big name institutions and by staff from the global north. And I should add that this isn't a criticism, it isn't solely a criticism, because we all feed into this. So we like to say that we have a degree from Oxford or Cambridge in the UK, or that we studied in Harvard, etc. So their names come with a kudos and a weight. And I think one of the red flags that we've had is that the capacity development needs to be deeper than that and more appropriate than that, and a big name is not sufficient. We've also highlighted an emphasis on capacity development for policymakers. So I ran one of the DFID-funded BCure programs, building capacity to use research evidence for a few years based here in Johannesburg. And it was highlighted very early on that actually that was based on a deficit model that assumes that it's the policymakers who are lacking in capacity and need support. And it was very clear to us very early on that actually, as researchers working in a university, we had far poorer understanding of the policymaking process than our policymaker colleagues had of the research process. So there are some assumptions around what capacity needs to be developed. These dialogues have also highlighted this lack of adaptation to local contexts and lack of understanding of what's needed in a local context and what gains traction. And I think that's coupled with a limited use of adult learning approaches, despite the fact that we know quite a lot of about adult learning, that doesn't seem to be reflected in this capacity development work for evidence use. I think something that affects my work on a pretty much a daily basis is around the way that we're set up in these initiatives and the way that they're funded to work in competition and not in collaboration. And we're really pleased as part of an Africa-wide network to be emphasizing collaboration and able to host dialogues like this, where we say we want to learn together and move forwards together. And this isn't about me saying to Beryl in Delhi with 3IE or to anybody else engaged in this webinar that what I do is better and that I want to learn from you so that I can win the bid. This is about trying to move forwards together. But unfortunately, so often in this space, particularly where there's funding available and that it's limited, there's a lot of competition instead of that kind of collaborative approach that we suspect is much more constructive when it comes to capacity development. And then last but not least, we know about great initiatives across the region. People are investing, and they're doing their best to avoid these things. They're investing in long-term programs, they're considering local agendas and local contexts, and working hard to meet genuine capacity needs in appropriate ways. And I think sometimes the great lessons that are coming from those initiatives are not being shared or given the profile that perhaps they need. I'm going to pass back to Beryl now so that we can start to think about how we move forwards. And Beryl, I see there's a message that says that some people are struggling to hear you a little bit. So if you have a chance to just speak up slightly, that would be great. You might be muted, Beryl.
Okay, now I'm not muted, but that might not address the problem either. But I'm going to adjust my volume on this end. Hopefully that's better. Okay, I'll try. Okay, so essentially, I just want to amplify a few points from Ruth's excellent overview of sort of a description of the landscape as we know it, but that also celebrating that it's not all about just problems, that there is some really innovative and exciting and collaborative in many ways work that's going on. It's how to break down the silos around it. So for example, the BCure, DFID BCure regional project, which involved the University of Joburg, as Ruth was mentioning, AFIDEP, INASP and ODI joined to work with African governments in Ghana and South Africa and Malawi, I think, not sure. But anyway, that bringing different approaches to how to improve decision makers' use of evidence. So that seems to be the holy grail in our world. And each of these approaches had benefits. And there's actually a very useful report from BCure about lessons from BCure and what worked. But what's fascinating is that that report is not widely known to a lot of people. And the lessons from that major initiative, which also has just fed DFID's coming up with a variation on the program, not a literal phase 2, but having learned lessons from BCure, now DFID wants to fund more capacity development for decision makers to use evidence. And so we will be seeing the fruits of these lessons, but it's in another DFID project. You know, so this goes to the, is it really widely accessible to everybody? Why not? Why are there not better communication plans around what's going on in collaboration within these large projects? How can we overcome that if it is about to give more money in the region for this type of work? These are questions that we all have, even those of us who are involved in this type of work on an ongoing basis. So how do we emphasize the lessons of co-production, co-creation, mutual respect, learning? We speak different languages as researchers, producers, and intermediaries and users, and that it's all, these are many hats that we can wear at the same time. They're not easily separated out for the benefit of project log frames and things like that. But another thing that's emerging from what we're hearing from the conferences, this was coming out at Evidence 2018 in a wonderful way. The Prime Minister of Uganda just spoke to the Uganda Evaluation Association Evidence Week participants last week and called upon all of us to realize that evidence use is a right and a need of everyone, not just the power holders in government, and that we are making a mistake to focus exclusively or mostly on policymakers. And the efforts that we're hearing about, IDRC had a great session at Evidence 2018 on citizen evidence production and use. And we're hearing more about public engagement for transparency and accountability. 3IE and the World Bank are going to be co-hosting a conference in a one-day conference in April in Washington, D.C. to talk about these types of efforts. But it's this idea of going beyond the known power centers that the funders care about and putting evidence in the right form at the right time in the right way, as we're learning as evidence, people who spend our time promoting evidence use, but in the hands of citizens, of parliamentarians, and working with the media in new and exciting ways, to value hearing more from those people specialized in knowledge translation techniques using adult learning approaches. We heard about that in a session at the Evidence 2018 conference. So, and these ideas of rapid responses where people can have questions and need evidence and need to be able to get at it quickly and effectively, especially Parliament and government users are talking a lot more now about it's not just how to use it, it's that we can't access it. Or if we can access it, we can't. It's not in the right form for us to use quickly. It's still not there at the right time in the right ways. So really now to move us on to the next section, sorry, which is the whoever's controlling the slides, we can move on to the next slide, number 5, because this is where the conversation really can become exciting. And that is that Ruth and I would like to welcome the audience, all of you who've been patiently listening to us, to tell us about what's resonating from our quick overview, which is designed not really mostly to just stimulate thinking and hopefully feedback. But we have some questions that we're trying to put forward, but with this idea of if we wanted to move now from these dialogues of what's working, what's not working, what do we like, not like, what can we do better, which are all valuable parts of the conversation, but to reframe now the discussion into what's the change that we want to see, and then how do we get there as the Africa Evidence Network within this entity in which we all share space and common objectives, and a diversity of how we go about it. How do we use the network to decide what should be our priorities out of all of the things that we could be focusing on? And how can the network have a voice as an advocate more widely and outside the network to be able to take these messages to donors and other stakeholders to keep the conversation going and to build momentum so that we actually go beyond conversation and we get change. So from discussion to action, conversation to change. And we'd really love to start to hear ideas about how we can rethink in new and exciting ways. If we're going to put on the next evidence conference, what are new ways that we could be organizing ourselves that can take us into new spaces and ways that we can interact and learn from each other and go away energized in new and different ways from the approaches to the conference planning that we've been using in the past. So if everybody can see the slide, we've summarized some of these starting questions. And I think, Siziwe, over to you now to moderate the inputs from the participants.
Okay, thank you very much, Beryl and Ruth, for your presentation. So now will be the time to start a discussion with the group. So what we'll do, members that are attending the webinar, you unmute yourself and contribute, and then the next person will do the same. So I'll also unmute you from my side so that we have one person talking at a go, so that we can be able to hear you as a person talking. So over to the audience, anyone who would like to go first to give their input. And yeah, and unmute your, if you need to give us an input, please unmute yourself so that you can give us your input. Thank you very much. It's time for group discussion. Anyone who would like to go first? Or even if you have a question or any input in terms of the presentations that have been made by the two speakers, if you are unclear of something, you can ask a question and then also give your input, because we would like to really hear from you as well, as you are part of this webinar and discussion.
Okay, hello.
Hello, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Elizabeth Kahurani from African Institute for Development Policy, AFIDEP. I really like the presentation, and I like what was said regarding the process of policy evidence being a right to everyone and not just policymakers, and that we need to get the evidence in the hands of citizens as well. And so it would be good for us to explore, maybe in the conference, effective ways of engaging the public with on the evidence making process, and how they can use that evidence to hold their leaders accountable when it comes to governance.
Thank you very much for your input. Anyone else who would like to give their input? Because I think as Africa Evidence Network, we have this platform for us to be able to share ideas and also be able to meet the needs of our members. So with us being in the time and period where we're trying to plan Evidence 2020, so it would be great to have people share their ideas, also based in terms of the experience that you had if you attended Evidence 2018. What were your experiences there? What would you like us to take to Evidence 2020? That will be great for you to share with us. I see, Karina, you are up. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Siziwe, thanks, Ruth and Beryl. I really like the thinking that you hinted at to reshape Evidence 2020 as a learning event. I think part of the difficulty for me to kind of think with, but how do we do that? It's partly wondering, as the AEN, do we have a sense of what are the capacity needs of our members? I mean, do we know that, you know, Karina wants to expand her capacity in this particular area? I mean, do we have a sense of that from AEN members?
I think Ruth and I will try and answer this. I think because annually we do a member survey. So issues around capacity came out a lot in 2018. Members saying we want to have capacity sharing opportunities, or we want to be trained by AEN. And we realized that as AEN, we won't be able to train all our members. As a result, just to kickstart this process, we thought let's do the database, that will sort of list all the capacity sharing activities across the continent, so people can select where they could go and attend these sessions. And secondly, we are having this webinar also just to put feelers out there to say what is the best way to go about doing capacity sharing to make sure that our members benefit from something like this. So as AEN, we're putting a lot of thought into it. So we're going to have a lot of consultation processes that we're going to be doing. We're going to be testing different pieces of work. For example, this webinar, and also we put out a blog around this particular issue. And also we're going to have a capacity sharing session at Afria in next month. So we're trying to see what is the best way to respond to our members' needs in terms of capacity sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siziwe. So if I can jump in, I think there's also a challenge to your question, which is a little assuming that a learning event is about focusing on providing capacity development to meet specific needs. But if we were to assume that rather than some participants coming and wanting training or workshops, instead everybody who comes helps us to understand the evidence ecosystem and to make it work better. What if we had a conference where we don't have any PowerPoint presentations, we ban them? What if instead, when we register for the conference, as part of our bio, we have to state the kind of expertise and experience that we bring, that we could share, and the kind of expertise and experience that we have no idea about, so that people come aware of who else is there and what they're bringing and how they might share, and that we do some kind of matchmaking and sharing discussion. What if every participant was told to please practice an elevator pitch based on the expertise that they have within the ecosystem? And we had lots of slots during the conference where people are asked, stand up, okay, we've got 5 minutes, let's have 5 elevator pitches from different people around the room so that we can get to know the expertise in the room. And those are just kind of a couple of wacky ideas. I'd love to hear what other wacky alternative, maybe I shouldn't say wacky, that makes it sound a bit crazy, but alternative ideas for meeting the needs you're hinting at, Karina. How do we do capacity sharing at a conference in new ways so that we can really focus on the sharing part? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I saw Gordon, you were up. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. This is Gordon from Evaluation Society of Kenya. All right, for me, I will want to see more of unpacking of evidence, because sometimes when you talk about evidence, I don't know whether we are all on the same page on exactly what we mean, but I'll be interested in us focusing a little bit more on unpacking evidence, because as you know, if you want to use evidence for decision making, is more of like a process, because you start with the data. Data collection or data generation or data gathering, and we all know that when data is processed and maybe analyzed, you get information, and if that information is interpreted, then you get some kind of knowledge, and when that knowledge, that knowledge can now be used to make decisions as evidence. So is there a way we can maybe look at the capacity issues and maybe focus on the entire spectrum of evidence, that is data gathering or data collection, quality data? We all know that garbage in, garbage out, that is data collection. How can we focus on translation of information into knowledge, and then from knowledge into what we call wisdom, or use of knowledge for decision making as part of evidence? So that entire spectrum, so that we have the right capacity in every component of the entire spectrum of evidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for your inputs. And I think towards the end of the webinar, the two speakers will have an opportunity to sort of have their closing remarks. So at the moment, we're still giving the participants to give their inputs. I saw Elizabeth, you unmuted yourself. You wanted to give a comment. Can you please go ahead?
My name is Elizabeth. I'm from Uganda, and I wanted to give this submission. I believe there are islands of evidence within the different stakeholders, the public sector, private sector, CSOs, think tanks. However, the challenge is usually how do they all bring together this evidence so that it can be tapped into by everyone, as you rightly put it, making it a right for everyone to access the evidence. So for me, I think what the evidence conference could also look at is a way of holding hands, a way of bringing those that have been able to have evidence brought in one space where everyone can be able to tap into, to showcase and show everyone else how they are doing it, so that lessons are then taken by the different participants, by the different countries that attend, by the different stakeholders in the evidence arena. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your input. Anyone else who would like to give their inputs? If you need to give your inputs, please unmute yourself so that you can be able to get an opportunity to say something. I think in the meantime, we're looking for, maybe someone is still gathering their thoughts to say what do they would like to share with us. Maybe Ruth, is there anything you would like to share in terms of Gordon and Elizabeth's inputs that they've just shared with us?
Thank you, Siziwe, and thank you, colleagues, for sharing your ideas. I think you both, those last two comments make very good points around the fact that we often talk about evidence, but we don't often unpack what we mean by it. And I think moving those conversations forwards and being more explicit about, in any one conversation, what we mean about evidence, and indeed trying to map out, as you were saying, Gordon, the full spectrum of different types of evidence would be a really nice idea, and we can think about how that kind of concept could be unpacked more in these discussions, both around capacity development, because what do we mean when we think about capacity development for evidence? If we don't say what we mean by evidence, then it's very difficult to think about what we mean by capacity. These silos, Elizabeth, thank you for that comment, are a real issue, and people have evidence across different sectors and in different filing cabinets, let alone different types of organizations, as you were saying, private sector, etc. And I think that there are some quite innovative ideas of trying to bridge those gaps. And we should think a little bit around how to share that innovation with one another in this kind of capacity sharing forum, but also whether or not the Evidence 2020 itself couldn't be a sharing forum to think about the different pools of evidence, islands of evidence, you call them, and how we can bring them together into one space. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Beryl, do you have anything to add to this discussion?
Yes, I'd like to thank the people who have given comments, because it already has sparked new thoughts that that I came into this and I had preconceived notions about certain ways, but thanks to the comments, I just had two ideas that I wanted to throw out that sort of riff on what's been mentioned, not to do anything other than put it on the table and say, oh, I'd like to know if this resonates with people. And I want to give a caveat. My caveat is that I tend to be one of those conference goers that can be very content to sit and listen. That there's the activist side of me, but somehow when I go to a conference, I just kind of go into a more passive role, and I very much enjoy listening and learning. And I get a little intimidated by this idea of, oh my goodness, I'm going into a session where I'm going to have to get up and do something, and write on flip charts and all that. Even though it always goes well, I'm always a bit hesitant to start. So that's the type of conference goer I am. But one of my ideas, I have two ideas to share. One is based on this, sort of what do we mean by evidence? But my challenge in this is how to have a discussion about what is evidence without it being sort of pedantic or, you know, these long debates that we have. I come from, you know, gender equality debates over the years, and we debate and debate and debate. What do we mean by gender? And never, you know, it's complex, so it doesn't get resolved. But one of the ways that we might want to organize it, or could, is this idea of there's a life cycle of evidence where we would make sure that we highlighted the different types. So for example, when I said to myself, scratching notes, well, where would I start my life cycle? I started it with people, not with data. I started with people in a context. And the fact that a lot of data that we collect is about people's knowledge of a situation and experience, how to solve a problem, the context in which an issue is happening, all of that. And taking through a guided discussion of everybody about, at each of these stages, what is evidence at this stage, and why is it evidence, and what do we do with it when it's at the data stage, and what are the various ways that we've learned in research to collect data, and what are the benefits of doing it that way, right through to what we usually focus on in evidence use too much, is how do you take evidence that you think is good evidence and you try to use it to influence a change by power holders or a group that you have targeted to say, I'm going to use evidence to help me win my arguments about why something needs to change. So that we start to value how evidence comes into being, how power affects it, how at certain stages, right from the beginning, certain people are excluded from both the discussions about what counts for evidence and also access to and use of evidence that's being produced about them. This is a big problem we have in the research cycle. The other idea that I would throw out is an idea of role playing. And I'm keying off this idea that it's too simplistic to say Ruth is a producer, Gordon is a user, Elizabeth is a knowledge broker, let's say, right? And that somehow we neatly play our roles in the evidence ecosystem in certain ways because of those labels. One of the lessons out of BCure was the fact that we shouldn't have these binaries, that at different times, for different reasons, producers are users. We all, to be effective, actually, we are knowledge translators. It may be something we don't do all the time or have specialists who help us with it, but nobody gets to not be a good knowledge translator and have anybody understand and value the evidence that we're producing and using. So we all need to value that we are all doing that to one level or another. But if we created scenarios where groups went in, and if I'm a researcher, I would become a policymaker, okay, or something like that. And that for a half a day, we worked on problem solving and scenario building using evidence as that group in this role playing, and then report out what we learned about each other and about the process and how we would do things differently because we had interacted and discussed what we were doing. So those were two ideas to go back to the question of, well, what would a learning event look like? And those might be horrible ideas, but they're just two that came to mind as everybody was talking. So I thought I'd toss them in.
Thank you very much, Beryl, for that input. I think attendees, you just need, I think I saw some new people that have just joined us. If you want to give your input in relation to the topic, please unmute yourself and then be able to give your input.
Hi, this is Nasreen. Is it okay for me to go ahead?
Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. Fascinating conversation and great ideas. And it kind of struck me that I was reflecting a little bit on the International Conference on Family Planning that I went to in Kigali last year. And I'm wondering to what extent we can learn a little bit from that conference in terms of the power of storytelling. And maybe, you know, research to policy doesn't create as many exciting stories as perhaps the experience of childbirth or contraception or stigmas and biases might. But perhaps to get innovative, we could think perhaps about asking that abstract submission be the equivalent of a script of a monologue or a script of a dialogue or a role play, as one way of thinking about how can we present differently about an experience where evidence has played a role in decision making, either at the priority setting stage, at the community level, at a policy level, whatever it may be, and that those kind of abstracts give researchers in some ways a different kind of challenge as to how to convey an experience, but also that it would be presented in that way. And we can think about plenaries perhaps being more like stories or storytelling rather than the presentations that we're used to. And this goes to Ruth's point about should we be banning the PowerPoint presentation. At the same time, people do need to submit abstracts for which they can justify attendance at a conference. So I was thinking, and a little bit of a springboard of what Beryl was saying, in terms of could this then look like role plays or scenarios where people change the perspective from which they're used to seeing these kind of opportunities play out, and maybe that could be something to think about at the plenary stage, at the workshop stage, but also at the abstract stage in terms of how to present scripts or dialogues or monologues, for example.
Thank you very much for this input. I think we are taking notes. So I think I'm trying to take 3 inputs at a time so that we see if our speakers can also share some insights for that. Is there anyone else who would like to share their inputs or contribution? Okay, maybe Ruth, do you like to share something in terms of what Nazreen was sharing?
So thank you. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say another wacky idea.
Okay, go for it.
No, I think that's what I should have started off with. Over to you, Ruth.
She's always a bit disjointed. Really just to say thank you, and I think that's exactly the kind of rethinking that we want to have, and that in order to work out what are the right approaches or the best approaches or the most practical ones and the ways of engaging people, we need lots of ideas, and then we can filter through them and share them and mull them over. I know that some of my colleagues who were in Australia for the Global Evidence Summit at the end of last year came back talking about evidence storytelling. And it's language that we're starting to use both at the Africa Centre for Evidence and as part of the Africa Evidence Network. So I like the storytelling and dialogue idea. It also has a nice tradition within the continent, so it has it rings true as maybe a more made in Africa approach than some of those conference traditions that we tend to religiously follow without really thinking through. So thank you. I like it, and I'd love to hear more. I just wanted to raise one other thing, which is that we're looking at Evidence 2020 as a conference, a learning event, and a few days in September in 2020. But we're also hoping that we can build a dialogue from now and onwards. So this is one of many discussions that we're hoping to facilitate and move these discussions along. So it might be interesting to also hear whether there are particular ways in which participants in this webinar would like those conversations to build, so that when we get together in September 2020, we're not just picking up on what was said in Evidence 2018, but actually we're building on an ongoing dialogue that moves forwards steadily over the period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for that input and question, just to stimulate the discussion. I've noticed that Emmanuel just joined us. So do you have an input to share? Because I just saw your message. Please self-unmute so that you can be able to share.
It's a bit noisy here, therefore, I don't know, looking at what we have in view, I don't know if global health security is considered as either a theme for thematic discussion or a panel or a plenary. So considering the health status or the health infrastructural systems in Africa, it would be good to consider global health security agenda or global health security, so that at the AEN were able to discuss it further. That would just be my input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for that input. I think Ruth has some thoughts in terms of that point that you just raised.
Thank you, and thank you, Emmanuel, for that. I think for me, the slightly broader picture that you're raising is that we're talking about evidence and evidence use for decision making, but we don't want to do that in an entirely abstract way. We do need to think about what priorities, evidence for what and decisions about what, and priorities around our continent, and some of which are particularly pressing. And your point about biosecurity, I think, is one of those that is up at the top of that list. So in thinking around the conference, we do need to balance this between the kind of more general discussions about evidence and how it's used, and actually the more applied issues about, you know, real priorities that are facing people on the ground all the time. So thank you, Emmanuel, for that reminder that we need to keep these really life and death scenarios and real kind of priority issues for the continent at the forefront of our discussions as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Beryl, hello. Please go ahead.
This is Enoch.
Go ahead, Enoch.
Yeah, I think I joined the meeting a little bit late, but what I just want to highlight is to appreciate the importance of these regular webinars, and also in our reference group meeting end of last year, I also proposed that maybe if we can have special thematic areas where we can say a thematic area for health, thematic area for this special area, thematic area into this, so that in terms of pushing the evidence, use of evidence in terms of policy making, it can be maybe pushed along those special thematic area if it's feasible. Obvious, definitely, maybe there will be challenges in terms of the personnel and the groups that will form those special thematic area. Because, for example, I'm from the health sector, and if we're going to look deeper into the ways in which we can push the agenda in terms of use of evidence, generating evidence, influencing policy, other
Have you finished, Enoch? Sorry, there was a bit of noise in the background whilst you were talking.
Hello?
You concluded your comment?
Okay, I think I had been disconnected briefly, so I think can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I was just saying some of the issues were highlighted in the reference group meeting end of last year, maybe just to see possibility of having special thematic areas, health, public health, whether climate change, or any areas that probably the evidence network is going to be focusing on. That can also assist in terms of looking from an in-depth point of view and see how basic and policy influence those areas. How can evidence influence policy making, advocates with policymakers, politicians, governments, and other key actors as far as policy making is concerned. I think those are my contributions. I joined a little bit earlier, but thank you for hosting the webinar and looking forward for more to come as we continue to interact.
Thank you very much, Enoch, for your input, and also, you know, the interest in the work that AEN is doing. I would like just to go to Beryl. Maybe she has a comment in terms of maybe the 2 or 3 inputs that were given. Beryl, over to you.
I think all of these ideas are just fantastic, that we can build on them and will help us frame the next rounds of discussions. It will definitely inform the conversations that we have at AFREA in a few weeks. I can't underscore enough the point about the importance of storytelling. We often, when we're doing training on producing effective policy briefs, and when I'm working with researchers, the fact is that in a world that's evidence driven by nature, there's an idea that it's about knowing the most technically, and having credibility because you're good at math and you can do all this complicated stuff and your research is just really fantastic and it's published in all the right journals, and as Ruth said, went to the right schools. But power to change is inherent in the power of the storytelling. And the storytelling is about making whatever is going on that you want to make better a story about human beings. And that time and again, when we're talking about promoting evidence use with decision makers, which is where we spend a lot of time and effort, that we think that we have to impress these power holders. And in fact, we are more successful oftentimes when we relate to what matters to their constituencies if they're elected, and that we identify with who they are as people, that they have partners, that they have children, that they live in communities, and to relate to the evidence along those lines. So I think that's a great sort of human focus for us to keep in mind through everything that we're talking about. And this idea about themes, and I think in terms of what should we be advocating for, this idea of framing evidence use not in the abstract, but around what are the timely issues where people want to know how to make something better, and how do we frame what we're saying about using evidence use better around what those issues are. And perhaps AEN will need to think in terms of maybe more localized approaches rather than regional approaches. That's something that we can keep discussing. So there's just so much there, and it's wonderful. And I think having these webinars is so much better than trying to just have these once every 6 months or once a year workshop sessions at big conferences. Not that it should be an either or, but clearly AEN is onto a winning formula to be having members gather and discuss these matters together. So I think that's it for me. And thanks to everyone, and wonderful hosting. And this is my first AEN webinar, and I can't wait to have a chance to join the next one.
Thank you very much, Beryl. I think our hour is finished, and I think that there's still so much to be discussed around this topic, around capacity sharing. So I think tomorrow the video has been taken for the webinar, and it will be uploaded to Africa Evidence Network website. So let's continue this conversation, because we don't want it to end now. Maybe people have ideas that they want to share with us. Please continue these conversations in the using our platforms. You can send us an email at ace@uj.ac.za, and also you can go to our website and also our social media pages to also share with us. So let's have this conversation on an ongoing basis, so that we have all your inputs as members that have attended this particular webinar. And also please check out the blog around this particular topic. I think it will also give you more information, because the presentation was a shorter version of what is in the blog. Also look at that and share with us. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending our webinar. Looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you very much. The webinar has been adjourned. Thank you.